support this noble cause as they have always done throughout the years. This week will mark the Legal Awareness Week, not only in Nairobi at Milimani and Supreme Court, but also in all our 8 branches and various chapters. And therefore, the members of the public are called upon, take this opportunity. All the legal professionals will be coming out in great numbers to offer you free legal advice. I also thank this council for its support on having this event launched successfully. And I also thank the branch chairs for embracing this initiative and working closely with the National Council for purposes of ensuring this event goes on successfully. It's not gainsaid that all your sacrifice cannot be given back with CPD points, but only God can reward you for this great noble cause that you have volunteered to give. Indeed, the Legal Awareness Week is premised on securing constitutionalism and the rule of law, reflection on 10 years of the Kenyan Constitution. And this theme was chosen based on the mood of the country in Kenya right now, when there are calls for change of the Constitution and also calls for implementation of the Constitution as is. The impact that the Legal Awareness Week has may be deemed to be a drop in the ocean. But don't forget that a single grain of rice can tip the scale. In the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. And indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. This week, a small group of committed legal professionals will be coming out to offer their services to change the country. And it's my belief that this group can. I therefore officially welcome all of you and open the Legal Awareness Week. Thank you very much. I will call on to our acting CEO, Collins Odhiambo, to give a few remarks and also invite the panelists today.
Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, worth mentioning, senior counsels, our partners, especially the ones who are supporting us in the process, eminent practitioners, advocates, ordinary ones like me, members of the public joining us. It is actually indeed our pleasure this morning to have you join us in offering your support in terms of listening and perhaps maybe getting opportunity to give your suggestions in this great discourse. I normally summarize it as one of the greatest social intercourse, because in this process we are going to give birth as a consequence to great ideas that would help to secure the gains that we've made in terms of constitutionalism. Worth mentioning that the Constitution actually remains the lifeblood for the rule of law, democracy, and good governance. Kenya has stood as an example in the region. Others have tried coping. Unfortunately, they do what is called aping. One time I watched a clip of an ape trying to wash dishes. It went into the sink while at the same time washing the dishes, because it had been imitating the good practice. In the region, Kenya is standing out, and we are not going to be tired from taking our rightful role. For that matter, I'm giving greatest applause to the Law Society of Kenya for having stood as the vanguard and also at the forefront on ensuring that the rule of law and constitutionalism is well secure within the region and more specifically domestically in Kenya. We are going to focus on the gains and also through this discourse identify the gaps. Then we shall also prescribe the way forward. We have a very strong council that has actually helped to meet even beyond the gender prescription. Mainly, the Law Society has had the opportunity to make affirmation that women are transformative leaders. For the first time in our history, we've beaten Rwanda as a country. We have more women in the Council of the Law Society of Kenya than ever before. And we believe through this, Kenya will be able to harness proper leadership because the Law Society has always remained the incubating center. So through this discourse, we are also going to incubate good ideas which would be worth emulating by different leaders in different sectors, the ones in parliament, religious leaders, and even the fisher folk in Suba, where I come from. Lastly, on my behalf and on behalf of the Law Society of Kenya, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to participate, but most importantly, to introduce to you the eminent persons that we invited to share their experiences, their thoughts, and their cognitive output. They are people who have actually invested much in intellectual property, making observations and keenly engaging in this discourse for a long time. Most of them are of age, and I think I would be doing them a disservice to pretend to be introducing them. I'll actually ask each and every one of them to take the occasion, maybe about a minute or so, to introduce themselves. Perhaps if there are people who come from where I come from, they would want to say more about themselves because we do it, but do we say really? So thank you so much. I propose to start with the members who are present at the podium. In this profession, normally seniority matters, but I'll beg to be forgiven because I didn't check the biodata very clearly. But I should imagine that my brother Maurice, by virtue of having been enrolled, I think it takes preeminence in terms of the time for enrollment. Then we'll move on like that to my friend Alosa, so that they take the opportunity, introduce themselves, let the people participating know who they are. Then from there, I'll gladly rest my case for the time being. Thank you so much for having logged in, having come to attend. So it's my pleasure to ask Maurice to introduce himself to the panelists.
Thank you so much, Collins. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maurice Mccollum. I recognize my teacher that is online, so she's responsible for my being here, Professor Kameri Mbote. I was admitted in the year 1998. So yes, I have been around for a while. I was privileged to be a classmate with Jacqueline Wahenya, so she can confirm that I did sit in a law school. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Then we are going to our moderator, Dr. Collins Odote, my namesake. I'll say more about him, but generally he's my senior, though we sat KCP at the same time. I dragged behind, so it will tell you the kind of cognitive production he has because he moved on very well, faster than I did. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Collins. Good morning, colleagues. I was going to say I am not as old as Maurice Mccollum and Jackie Wahenya. But Collins, the member of LSK, makes the mistake of saying that I've been around as long as him. I am not old, Collins. I was much younger than Maurice, and we served in the same law firm for a few years. I now teach law at the University of Nairobi. I got admitted in the year 2000. So because my stroke is 00, so it's therefore that I am very young because I still have a lot of years to grow. So those of you who are 8, 6, 0 is the statics, 0 is the youngest, so I'm extremely young. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Now I go to our learned brother, Alosa Advocate.
Good morning, members. I hope I'm audible. Alosa is my name. I'm an advocate of the High Court and also as a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. I was admitted in the year 2009, and I'm proud to say I'm the youngest in the panel today, but not necessarily in the room. I see some younger people than me in the room. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Advocate Alosa. Now, someone will help me with those who are appearing online. I may not have their clear bios, but oh, that's okay. Now, the moderator will guide how the panelists joining us online will move with us. Alosa has got their bios, and that is all for this morning. Allow me to welcome all of you to this session. The Lord bless and keep you. Normally, I'm a born-again Christian, practicing and also sometimes evangelizing, but I don't want to do that. This is not the forum for that. I'll only ask that you allow me to pray so that we can start off. Okay, let's pray. Loving King Jesus, Yahweh Elohim, our God, we thank you for this opportunity that you have allowed us, my Father, to express ourselves in the ministry that you've given us. The ministry, my Father, of access to justice, helping the indigent persons, and even the ones who are not indigent, empowering them with knowledge so that they may be able to stay alive, because people die for lack of knowledge. We thank you for according us this opportunity. May you be with us throughout the discourse in Jesus' name. Amen.
Colleagues, good morning. For those of us who are joining online, welcome to the new normal of meetings. I just think watching last night, the CS for ICT was having a conversation with a young person who was talking about the new normal and what that then means in terms of technology for organizing meetings. We'll try and adopt as much as possible. I see that my very good friend, village mate, and at one point, almost my MP, Duncan Ojuang, has also joined. Duncan, do you want me to give you an opportunity to say hello?
You barely escape. I will have been your MP.
We thank God for small masses.
Thank you, viewers. Thank you, Dr. Dote. Thanks.
And the other people joining online, and those of us who are here, welcome to this year's Legal Aid Week, organized by the Law Society of Kenya. As the convener of the meeting has told you, that's Faith Odhiambo. This meeting has a very long history. Summer Laws and myself have the pleasure of moderating the first session. The first session, from the topic that you see, is extremely broad. It seeks to look at the Constitution 10 years later, in terms of what it means for citizens, what are the gains, what are the misses. And it does so with a particular focus on what is important for legal aid. Legal aid, from those, if those who are used to be at Kituo cha Sheria a long time would remember, because legal aid is largely associated with Kituo cha Sheria because they're the ones who used to give legal aid even before it was recognized by the Constitution. It's about recognizing, protecting, and promoting the rights of citizens, especially the indigent. And that's why the first session focuses on the Bill of Rights, focuses especially on economic, social, and cultural rights. We have a very star-studded panel. I will try to very quickly tell you about them. I have, I think, a 10-page bio. So if I try to read it, we will take 1 hour out of the 3, just going through their bio. I doubt whether that would be a very good use of our time. So you'll allow me to very quickly summarize in 1 or 2 words what I know about them. So I will start with Evans Monari. Evans, are you online? Ah, excellent. Then I can introduce Evans Monari. Evans Monari has been in the Council of the Law Society of Kenya as long as I've known council members. I don't know, Evans, what has happened the last few council elections, that you're no longer in the council. Every council that I see elections, I used to tick. You see, before there was no campaigns. So you'd receive a list, and I would tick Evans because I knew Evans, then look for the rest of the people. That is how long Evans has served the Law Society of Kenya. Evans is a partner in the law firm, a litigator, and has done very many useful things for this country and for the society. So we're extremely privileged to have you, Evans, joining the panel today. If you want to know the rest about Evans, just Google, and you will see the rest of the things. So thank you very much, Evans, for joining. That's the first panelist. The second panelist is Maurice Mccollum's teacher. Professor Patricia Kameri Mbote is a senior counsel, is a teacher, and is many other things. Professor Patricia, are you online? I see your face. At least I see your photo. I'm not sure that I can hear your voice.
I am online.
Thank you very much, Professor Mbote. Professor Mbote has done work on environment, has done work on gender, has done work on land, has done work on natural resources, has worked in Kenya, has worked in Zimbabwe, has taught in Kenya, has taught in Zimbabwe, has taught in the US, has taught in the UK. I could go on and on, but since it's Maurice's teacher is good enough. So that's the second person. The third person that you have is Patricia's student. That is Maurice Mccollum. And Maurice Mccollum is here in person. Maurice holds many titles. I will tell you about the title you do not know. Maurice has, no, 2 things you don't know about Maurice. Maurice almost became a priest. But as they say, life happened. But he is a very religious person, chairs a committee and a church where they worship with Patricia. And the other thing about Maurice that you do not know, Maurice is a best man to many people. So if he comes to your committee for a wedding, he will most likely be a best man. He was my best man and still is my best man. That tells you about his qualities. When he is not doing his religious duties, when he is not being a best man, he serves as the regional director of the Ford Foundation. So karibu sana Maurice. The rest of the things you can read. The fourth person is somebody who, as long as I've known her, Catherine Muma, are you online? Morning, Catherine.
I'm online, Charlie.
Yeah.
Morning, how are you?
Hi, Kisumu.
I'm in Nairobi now.
Ah, okay. Karibu sana. As long as I've known Catherine, Catherine has been in a government task force or commission. Catherine was in the Kriegler Commission. So those of you who have read the Kriegler Commission report, you will find that she was a commissioner. She also was, she's one of the 2 commissioners who dissented in one of the chapters. The chapter where they're discussing about who won or lost. Catherine was one of the dissenters, and we'll discuss that in a short while. We'll discuss about the rights to the political rights, Article 38. Catherine used to be the AG's chambers. Catherine was a commissioner of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Catherine was a commissioner of CIC. Catherine will be a commissioner in a new commission. But before then, Catherine serves as a member of the ODM Elections Board. So, karibu sana, Catherine Muma. The next person is the one person who I know. If you ask him to write a document tonight and give it to you tomorrow, he will give you 40 pages with footnotes. So I am happy he was not asked to write, he was just asked to speak, because he would have given us 40 pages in footnotes. Senior Counsel, Professor Tom Ojienda, are you online? Professor Ojienda?
I am.
Excellent, thank you very much, Professor. that speaks about the quality of his reading and the quality of his academic work. And Tom has served this council as a chairperson for very long. Tom also served as a commissioner of the Judicial Service Commission and continues to be a very active practitioner. So we're very grateful to be joined by Professor Tom Ojienda. I already introduced Duncan Ojuang, but I will add two other things. Duncan Ojuang is the Dean of African Nazarene University. Duncan Ojuang believes, speaks, and practices the fact that law and rules must be African-centric. He does not believe in Western ideologies, despite the fact that he's half Western, because he has a Western, a spouse from the Western world. But that is how committed he is to African ideology. So welcome.
Thank you, Doc.
And lastly, somebody will be joining us at 10:15. Is somebody who is our teacher, has done many things. He was supposed to be in Barbara's panel, but he said he cannot miss the opening session. So, thankfully to myself and Losa, and to the disadvantage of Evans Ogada and Barbara Malawa, we're joined by the governor of Makueni. The governor of Makueni used to have a very heated conversation during our early years in law school with the retired Supreme Court Judge J.B. Ojuang. J.B. believed that a lawyer could not write in newspapers because newspapers were for pedestrians. Professor Kivuda Kibwana believed that the constitution and the law was for everybody else. So if you could not be able to communicate it to the newspapers, you are not doing justice to it. So we are very glad to have Professor Kivuda Kibwana join us in a conversation about legal aid, which is a conversation about citizens and ensuring that the law serves citizens and not just the elite. Professor Kibwana will join us at 10:15, and we'll be inviting him to come and speak to us. So as we start the conversations today, and Sam has introduced himself, we will co-moderate this session with Sam. Our duty is to ask the difficult questions and smile as the panelists try to answer them. As we start this conversation, I am reminded of a write-up that was in the newspapers, I think around 2 weeks ago, by a columnist in the Daily Nation, Gitau Warigi. And Gitau Warigi, speaking about the gender debate, made the point that majority of lawyers try to obfuscate things by speaking about in many words, but words that don't mean sense, because they talk about Cap 30, Cap 93, the law is very clear, without doubt, but when you ask them, what exactly are you saying, they can't tell you. And that's the context within which we'd like to have the first question to all the panelists. In a language that tries to debunk what Gitau thinks about lawyers, are those who talk about big words. So please don't use the words that my namesake and the secretary of LSK used. Words like social intercourse and those other things. Say in the words that the fisherman from Suba, where he comes from, can be able to understand. And please explain to the ordinary person. The 2010 Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, is said to be very progressive and transformative. If you look at the 10 years that it's been in force, and if you take the fisherman from Collins Odhiambo's village, what do you see as the big practical gains that you can be able to convince that fisherman that the Constitution has delivered for them? Question number one. Question number two, what are the misses? What are the things that the Bill of Rights has promised but not delivered? So in the next 5 minutes, if each of the panelists can try and answer that question to us, we'll be extremely happy. What are the big practical gains? What are the big practical misses in terms of delivery of rights in a progressive manner? And we will start with the person who speaks to citizens on a day-to-day basis, because politicians say that they are the ones who represent the citizens. So the closest to the person who speaks to the politicians before Governor Kibwana joins is Catherine Muma. So Catherine, the floor is yours in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Daktari.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Evans, Catherine has focused a lot on devolution as one of the gains, he thinks, for the rights of the people, and says that that is the greatest thing for the citizens. But he says we have not respected that law. As a legal practitioner, Evans, as a legal practitioner, number one, do you agree with Catherine? And number two, what is your assessment of what LSK has done in terms of both the gains and the misses? Evans.
I must agree with Catherine on what she has opined with regard to the fishermen in Suva. But I look at it in a different way as well. Before I answer the question on the LSK.
Go right ahead, thanks.
The fishermen in Suva has not benefited from the new constitution at all. There's no practical gain the fishermen can be recorded as having gained. Instead, in the guise of devolution, funds that have been sent to development units throughout the Republic of Kenya have mostly found their ways into private hands. So to say that we have put corruption into the devolution process and taken it to the rural areas and not really benefited the people the way it was meant to be. And that's really a big shame on ourselves as lawyers, because the reason why we promulgated the new constitution 10 years ago was to be able to be in a situation where we can protect institutions. Lawyers have traditionally been relied upon to provide technical advice on legal issues. However, we must realize that it's not what the role of lawyers should be. It is now evidently universally accepted that the days of narrowly enforced legal advice should come to an end. So that instead of us giving cold advice to the fisherman from Suva, we should be able to give advice that protects him and protects his property, protects his family, instead of making him to be the channel monger and political rallies and to protect people otherwise directly in the economy that should be benefiting. On the role of the law society, we are sometimes condemned because we are not seen on important issues. I must say that the role of the law society has evolved over the years. It has been prominent on issues, and we should give it encouragement rather than discouragement. That's what I would say.
But Evans, there are those in the village in Turkana who are not sure whether LSK is a welfare club worrying about practice matters, whether LSK is a political party seeking to have their members go to parliament, or whether LSK protects their rights under the constitution. What would be your answer to that person in Turkana?
I think the person in Turkana needs some education, some awareness. You see, in today's world, the modern lawyer has a responsibility to counsel clients beyond the strict legal challenges and provide advice on practical considerations. Likely public perceptions and reactions, and generally doing the right thing. In addition to the clients, we lawyers owe duties to multiple other stakeholders, including our own legal profession, the rule of law, and society as a whole. So we must find a way in which we can reach and touch and feel what the man in Turkana or the man in Slovakia requires in terms of legal advice, beyond the daily strict advice on what needs to be done with the courts or properties.
Thank you, Evans. Maurice, moving away from devolution and going back to the rest of the issues about rights, you represent the Ford Foundation in East Africa. So you look at Kenya as compared with our neighbors, and I had Collins Odhiambo comparing us to Rwanda, saying for the first time we've beaten Rwanda in gender, but only at LSK. You know the play Betrayal in the City, and one of the actors made the statement about it was good while we waited. Now that the time has arrived, there's nothing to look forward to. If somebody said that that is the assessment of the gains and misses of the 2010 Constitution, what would be a practical response to them from your vantage point as res rep of Ford Foundation?
Thank you very much, Collins. First, I want to congratulate the Law Society of Kenya on not only this week, but also on the conversation that you had on the 27th of August, when we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Constitution. I'm also very privileged today to wear three hats as I sit here. One as a citizen of Kenya, so reflecting on these in terms of my own rights and also civic responsibilities. The second thing, the second hat is, of course, as a member of this law society, and the third as the regional director of the Ford Foundation Office for Eastern Africa, an institution that has invested in this very document that we're discussing today. So I would tell Moses Watonga in Bitrol in the city, as he was having that conversation with Askari in jail, that as a matter of fact, yes, it was better while we waited, but we are actually in a good place. We are in a good place because we have a good text, and many of us in the last many weeks have been talking about the good text. But I also want to say we have a spirit too. This is a document that has a spirit, and it is also important to talk about that spirit. Last December, just to illustrate the spirit, I was in my village and there was a meeting of a committee that was discussing a local water project. And these fairly old people just said there was a vacancy, and they say, no, we want that particular vacancy to be filled by a lady because the Constitution requires it. So even at the village level, there was an understanding that the Constitution of Kenya required something about inclusion. And I think that is something to cherish and to celebrate. I also want to talk about, like Article 128, when we talk about dignity, an inherent right to dignity. As we all know, when we started the preventive or the measures that we are taking, the containment measures for corona, there was rather an over-enthusiastic response by the police. And I remember one evening after watching news, my 12-year-old son turning and asked, Daddy, so those people that sometimes we see on the streets, do the police beat them also? But where could they go in the evening when everyone else is going home because there's something about curfew? And I think it was something beautiful to hear a 12-year-old talking about the inherent dignity of everyone, including people that they see on the streets. And so I would say there's something to celebrate there. I would also say that when you look at the articles in the Bill of Rights, and particularly those dealing with economic, social, and cultural rights, there is an inherent expectation of efficiency and avoidance of waste, profligacy, and theft, or as we prefer to call it, corruption. I think if you call it corruption, it kind of does not sound so bad. But if somebody called you a thief, I think it sounds like a real deal. But if somebody says you're corrupt, you're kind of like, So I think we should also call it what it is, theft, or murder, because some people end up dying anyway. Then we begin to feel the weight. If we are going to realize those rights, I think there is an inherent expectation that the people who hold the duties, because now that people have the rights, if you think about the jural correlatives and jural opposites, it means somebody holds those responsibilities. They need to be efficient, they need to be less wasteful, if at all. And it also means that the people have a right to public participation. And so many of these things have been provided by the Constitution, and I think they're great. Lastly, I actually think that there are a few things that Corona has taught us, because when we think about these economic, social, and cultural rights, there's a sense in which they take us to the indivisibility of rights. Because the people who are, especially in the informal settlements, that have had challenges with sanitation, access to clean and potable water, security, all these things that are mentioned in Article 43 we have seen governments, both national and county, trying to go into those spaces and kind of make some things right. But one thing that we've been taught during this period is the need for competent and efficient governments. But competent and efficient governments do not just happen. People have to engage with them. People have to elect them. People have to keep them accountable. It therefore means that this constitution actually requires all hands on deck, both whether it is on civic matters and or on economic and social rights. Lastly, therefore, it means that the spirit of civic engagement must be awakened, because if we go to your pet subject, Collins and mine, about environment, I think that is where this country is going to face present and clear danger of national security, because a few years from now, the clashes over natural resources is exactly that. So the Constitution is something to celebrate. And Mosese Watonga should know that we are in a good place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurice. You know, me, I'm a villager from Asumbi, but Maurice, in answering my question, spoke about dual correlatives and opposites. I have no idea what those things mean, but he also spoke about spirits. I also have no idea what spirit means. I know Duncan Ojuang knows about spirits, and I know Professor Ojienda knows about dual correlatives and opposites. So let me start with Professor Ojienda. Professor Ojienda, I suspect that this thing about dual correlatives and opposites must have been said by somebody called Hoffield. I hear so. And it must mean that they are right holders and duty bearers. And I suspect that the duty bearers is government. But a lot of the times when you speak about government, Professor Ojienda, we mean the executive. I want you to speak to me about two things. Number one, what is your assessment of the relationship amongst the three arms of government in terms of enabling citizens to enjoy the gains of the 2010 Constitution? Question number one. Question number two, you served as a member of the Judicial Service Commission. The judiciary is celebrated, in addition to devolution, as one of the vanguards of the Bill of Rights. Every day, they continue to stand up to the executive excesses. But at the same time, the judiciary gets accused in recent past of going back to the bad old days. What can we do in terms of addressing some of the misses of the judiciary so that they can continue being the vanguard of the rights in the 2010 Constitution? So talk to me about Hoffield and the relationship amongst the three arms, and then talk to me about the judiciary. Professor Ojienda. Where have you guys taken senior counsel? Emily, is that you who is muting Professor Ojienda? Who is muting him? Professor Ojienda, please unmute yourself. I'm told it is not here. It must be somebody in your office who is making that terrible mistake. Okay? I suspect it has something to do with spirits. So let me go to Tom Ojienda. Let me go to Duncan Ojuang first. Duncan, Maurice speaks about the spirit of the Constitution. But in the African setting, there's also the issue about spirits, especially in the context of the discussions about gender equality and equity. To what extent has African customs and traditions stood in the way of realization of the rights under the 2010 Constitution, and what can we do to bridge that divide?
Thank you, Dr. Odote. Maybe if I could also try answer briefly the initial questions you had.
Please go right ahead.
Okay. You know, whenever you talk to senior lawyers and people who are in the struggle, they will tell you that they kept going to court severally, and they knew very well they were not going to win. But they still filed a lot of cases against the Moi government, for example. and they were saying they were simply doing it as a way of advocacy and a way of appraising the issue and bringing them as a national discourse, though they knew very well that the judiciary then could not favor or give them the victory. Interestingly, now under 2010, people go to court even in difficult cases expecting to win. And that is a very big difference. When Raila is going to court, former prime minister, about an election and against the president, the citizens are actually expecting fairness. That is a groundswell, in my view. That yes, before nobody expected to win, now people expect to win, and people do win, even with all the challenges in the judiciary. Secondly, remember the Constitution took 30 years before it was set. There is a lot of activism before that protracted, leading to this. So the people, for example, we were saying in the villages, are aware of the struggle before the Constitution, and their expectation became clearer. As you are saying, what does this Constitution do to the person in the village? I remember by the time Orengo came to Homa Bay, and I was, I think, in Form 3 or Form 4, and we were the youths offering him guard against and then pushing people then. And he had come to represent Shemu Chuodo about a case between Shemu Chuodo and Filgona. And out there, as he was talking to the crowd, he pronounced things that I thought were almost a dream. That is about 1999. That you see, now we are, as a community, we think we can be president. And that is fine. But what we even need is to change the Constitution so that whether we are in opposition, we can get some share from the national cake. I mean, in Form 3, that sounded like a dream. But that is the reality today. We can talk of how much is the share, but the evolution has come, and therefore it has happened. So as I look at what the Constitution has done, before I briefly talk of the gender issue, is there any argument in Kenya which doesn't end up being a constitutional issue? Whether it is any order from the government, whether it is TSC and the strike, whether it is salary increment, whether it is the role or revenue allocation, which before was not a constitutional issue. Now it is being discussed within the purview of the Constitution. Whether it is inclusivity, it is now discussed within the Constitution. So, in fact, one politician, I was telling them, are you sure you can't find any clause within the Constitution to stand on in your weird argument? Because it has given something for everybody. That is a norm setting. That today, our arguments, as weird and as off as they are, revolve around something within the Constitution. That is a very big achievement, and that people go to court expecting actually to win. So I will talk about marginalization later on, but I think in the gender issue, I think that the Constitution is clear. Oh, we were not supposed to say that. In fact, you are like my law professor. He told me the weakest part of a lawyer's argument is when he's saying it is clear. Then, and what he does in litigation is just to go where somebody have said it is clear or it is obvious, and he knows that it is not obvious or clear, and your mind give you those words so that you can gloss over them because the burden of making them clear is too big. When we look at the inclusivity and even the gender issue and your question of customary law, the national parliament which have failed to pass the gender issue are not born from the customary law. They are part of the state. They are born from the civilization or the westernization, and therefore it might be unfair to blame customary law while we know very well that our parliament are based on the positivist law that came in the New World as a result of colonization and independence. It is not an issue of customary law. It's an issue of the system that are there, that are so patriarchal from their history. And that patriarchy came because the system we inherited from colonization are patriarchal. You know how long it took women to sign contracts in Europe. You know that initially women could not vote in the US. And so this lingering effect could not just be blamed on African custom. I think part of it is inherited. I usually share what Chebi Kilimo told us, that when she wanted to run for parliament in Elgeyo Marakwet, the elders sat and said, Chebi Kilimo, you cannot run because you are a child. You are a child because you have not undergone this important ceremony called FGM. And she looked at them and told them, isn't our culture requiring that we actually send children? You don't send grown-ups, do you? And so I want you to send me to parliament as a child and work for you. And within that council of elders, they said, actually, you know, you are right. And so she negotiated within the culture. I think some of the approaches that have been adopted could sometimes not be very helpful. For example, the interest convergence, where people negotiate within culture. Professor Kameri Mbote will talk, and part of the theory they develop even with women in Zimbabwe is path made by walking. That you negotiate your space within the culture. You don't come from up and say, you know, there's nothing here within the culture, but you look from within. But as a summary, I think the fact that the villains, the corrupt, the holy, everybody is claiming the Constitution. There is nothing you can do today which is not a constitutional thing. When you destroy people's rally, you claim Constitution. When they claim you are destroying their rally, they claim you are violating Constitution. That is a groundswell already. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for the point about negotiating culture, but also the point that everything has become constitutional is actually the point of reference. So Maurice, actually then, Dr. Gibson Kamau Kuria was right. You remember earlier on, before the 2010 Constitution, anytime you went to court and you are even doing a simple commercial dispute, Gibson would make a constitutional argument. I'd be like, so what has the Constitution got to do with non-payment of rent? So 10 years later, Duncan is saying that actually Dr. Kamau Kuria was right. Everything is constitutional. Thank you very much, Duncan.
And Doc, just a second, we have that expansion because of the expansive Bill of Rights, the empowered judiciary, the values in the Constitution of governance and value to live by, and so everything is judiciable, yes.
And since everything is judiciable, Professor Ojenda, I am sure you heard my questions, so I will not repeat them. Hoffels, yes?
The same questions the chair of Games and Guns?
No, I asked you questions that were much more specific than Games and Guns. Mccollum, who spoke before you, spoke about Hoffield, and I said the only person who knows about Hoffield and dual opposites and correlatives is Professor Ojenda. So basing with that argument, please tell us about how the relationship between the three arms of government has inhibited or facilitated the enjoyment of the Bill of Rights. But number two, that the judiciary is celebrated as one of the vanguards of the Bill of Rights in the 2010 Constitution. But at the same time, there are those who say that they have gone back to the bad old manners of the Nyayo era. What's your assessment of that second statement? So if you could answer those two statements within the context of gains and losses, that would be very useful. Thanks, Prof. Ojenda.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. I know that my learned friend Mccollum is quite adept at Hofeld and jurisprudence. And essentially, I think what we pick from the architecture of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, of course, number one is that, and just to address the question, one, it creates a delicate relationship
Thank you very much, Professor Agenda. Governor Kibwana, have you joined us now?
Yes, good morning. Yes, I have been listening.
Good morning, Governor. How is Makweni?
McQueen is good, and I realize that I am not included in those who know jurisprudence.
No, let me speak to you. You are not in those who know jurisprudence. You know much more fundamental things than jurisprudence. Governor Kibwana, when I speak about you, I remember the statement about a man of all seasons. You have been a law teacher and a law professor, and that's why you wonder why you are not known about jurisprudence. But you nowadays much known for being closer to Mudeo in Makueni. You have researched law at Clarion. You have done activism at NCEC. You have been in parliament as a minister. You have been an advisor on constitutional matters. You have run for elections. Those of you who have run for elections always tell people as they speak, you are speaking, can you even be elected as an MCA? Meaning that you have earned the right to speak. I want you to speak on two things, Governor. Number one, to speak from a duty bearer's perspective. When you were advocating for the 2010 constitution at NCC, you were looking for a progressive constitution that would change people's lives, and I'm sure you'll talk to us about devolution in a short while. But also, Professor Gienda has raised the issue about litigating all aspects of the constitution. I don't want to say thankfully or not, but you're not one of those who he saved at the Supreme Court through the election petition. So you've won throughout the time, and the courts have not had to intervene to save you. But one of the things that was important in the 2010 constitution is the framework for public interest litigation to enable ordinary citizens to be able to ventilate their rights. Before the 2010 constitution, there was the complaint that the judiciary is not progressive. They are locking people out based on technicalities. I think there used to be a state council, or the name withheld, who anytime you filed a case would never prepare the substance because they knew they would lock you out on technicality. 10 years later, everybody can go to court. But anytime you talk about public interest litigation, Professor Kibwana, people only mention Okia Umtata. What can we do, Professor, to ensure that the spirit of NCC Mageuzi, which is about people-driven, can permeate our public interest litigation so that we can have many more people going to court on their own behalf as public interest citizens? On that, do you think civil society has helped us, or have they also backslid? Question number one. Put on the next hat as a right holder. Before you came, Catherine Muma spoke very nicely about devolution. It's transformed lives. It's one of the most important things. But then, and I will report that Evans Monari did not agree. Evans Monari says that while devolution was good, it has become an access to resources for those who are holding positions. So they go and dip their hands in the cookie jar. So when we talk about the benefits of devolution, it is benefits to private individuals as opposed to benefits to Mudeu. What's your assessment of devolution 10 years later? So if you could talk about those two things in the context of legal aid and the rights of ordinary citizens. Governor Kibwana. Thank you very much, Governor Kibwana. I want to stop this first round where we started. Professor Patricia Kamerimbote, from the ivory tower where you sit and looking at all the things that have been said, what do you see as the key gains of the 2010 Constitution, and what do you see as stopping us, still preventing us from exhaling? Professor Patricia.
And I was worried that you were going to ask me about fishing and men. So, and again, while you say that I am at the ivory tower, you do know that people in the ivory tower also sometimes come down. Looking over the horizon, I see a constitution that actually, like all the other panelists have said, is very robust. Having been in a small way engaged in discussions leading to the Constitution, when the Constitution was finalized, I felt like a child going into a candy store. That everything that I wanted was there, and I didn't know what to pick. I think as you look at the different provisions from the preamble to the annexes, you can see the far-sighted nature of the Constitution by looking at the Sustainable Development Goals that came after it in 2016, and even Vision for Africa, the African world. The Constitution contains all the aims and aspirations of the UN and our African Union. And in fact, you may think that they were talking about our Constitution when they say, leave no one behind. Because as everybody has talked about the issue of inclusion, participation, dispersal of power, so that not that Professor Kibwana talks about people seeing this as baby governance. I remember attending a governor's meeting. I was facilitating, and a cabinet secretary who I will not name was looking very angry. I will not even say where the meeting was because we may know who the person was. He was very agitated. And as a facilitator, I went to him and he asked, did you see the signs as you came here? And I said, what signs? That they are talking about 48 governments. And I wondered, what is wrong with 48 governments? So in essence, that speaks to the tension that remains. We have vertical and horizontal dispersal of power. We have devolved units, but they are not being recognized. I think also that we have a robust bill of rights. As a person who wrote for many years about environment and about gender, I must say it was good not to have to say that Section 824 of the Constitution closed back on the right to equality by not including sex as an objectionable ground for discrimination. And also, having again looked at the environment, we kept talking about no lock as standard. And even after the Environment Management and Coordination Act came in and gave the right to everybody to go and litigate for the environment, the fact that it was not in the Constitution actually made a lot of courts stop at the technicality, as you rightly said. I would therefore say that the Constitution has moved us very many steps ahead. And in fact, for me, just the lifting of the cultural exemption, for women it would be that, yes, you have all these rights, but in areas of family, devolution of property upon death, that wasn't included. To have our Constitution in 2010 actually say men and women are equal and to not have that culture question come in, for me was really, really a breath of fresh air, even as a scholar, but also as a Kenyan. The protection of women's rights, I think we had so many cases of where people shouldn't have a time on land without end. People should only have a time on land for as long as they use it productively. But remember that the Constitution reduced the tenure of non-Kenyans. And actually say they could only have 99 years. We may say 99 years is a lifetime, but remember that there were people who had 999 years, double nine years, and nobody went to court to say that this was wrong. So for me, just the acceptance that people could talk about land in this way, bringing in the issue of land as public trust, that belongs to Kenyans as a nation, as communities, as individuals, having a very robust way of talking about public land. And if you remember the Lungu report and how people in power were treating public land as their land, which they would give to their friends and family. I mean, for me, that is really something. But the other thing is the recognition of traditional knowledge as intellectual property. Because for the longest time, ways of knowing of medicine people was actually put as behind ways of knowing for people who go to the lab. And I could go on and on. But maybe I should come to the point where I think this is a very robust constitution. But putting new wine in old wineskins, that sometimes is seen as negative. But for me, I think as positive. Because the more you try to put new wine in old wineskins, the more it will force those wineskins to, old wineskins to burst. And once they burst, at times, we are going to realize what the Constitution wants us to do. So for me, I'd say our cup is half full, not half empty. And even though we have had very many misses, we still have something to go with. One of the biggest problems, I think, has been when you talk about the Bill of Rights, the adoption of a progressive approach. That, for me, I think is a problem. I think the other one is where we see the state as we have made citizens. I don't know whether this was by design or before. Citizenry are made very dependent on the state for rights realization. You know, Serikali's idea. And we know that the failure of the state is documented, and the state is only one of many duty bearers. And even where it is the only one, it has performed extremely poorly. If you look at the area of water or even education. So basically, for me, the real missing piece in this puzzle is that we changed the structure, but we left the foundation intact because we failed to address the soft parts, that is the leadership and integrity. And the failure to address leadership and integrity, for me, has denied the Constitution growth. It has also denied it a nurturing ecosystem that it needed to really recalibrate the systems that we had before so that we could realize the rights that the Constitution promised and enshrined. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Professor Mbote. Sam, I am sure you have some things that are nagging at the back of your mind from the conversations on spirits, the conversations on gender, the conversations on ecosystem, and the conversation on devolution. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Before I ask my question, let me recognize the presence of the President of the Law Society of Kenya, President Harvey. Are you in? President Harvey. Well, I think he has stepped out. We'll come back to him. It gives me a pleasure to sit here today and ask questions to professors. As we were growing up, we were told we take direction from professors, we don't ask them questions. But today, I have the honor of asking the professors question, and I'll want to begin where Professor Mbote has actually stopped. Professor, you mentioned that with the new constitution, we've made several gains going forward. I want you to speak to us on the need, and you spoke very well during the launch of the BBI with my co-host, Dr. Dotim. What is the gaps that the BBI will seek to fill going forward, Professor Mbote?
Thank you very much, Sam. Let me make a disclaimer here. I was not a member of the Building Bridges Initiative group that went to study and came up with the report. And I was asked with Dr. Odote as a civically engaged Kenyan and a person who can read at a fast speed to read the report and present it to Kenyans. And when I looked at that report, I can say that the report duplicates a lot of the things we have in the Constitution. So for me, the BBI report is really the minimis. I shouldn't be using the minimis. It is really the minimum standard. After the Constitution of Kenya, the BBI report should actually take us further. So what I saw was the fact that a lot of the things that hadn't happened, the Building Bridges initiative was trying to come up with, and I think the most tractable one was the winner take the call. How do you handle divisive elections? Because every 5 years, you have these people who present themselves and actually win quite a big percentage, but after the elections, they have to go back home. And I think there's nothing wrong with rethinking how do you handle that? How do you ensure that people who voted for them don't feel left out? The other issue, I think, was the realization of the two-thirds gender rule. Actually, that was unanimously put there. The whole question about ensuring devolution work. So we must have been listening to Prof. Iguana because, in fact, the proposal there was that you increase the resources for devolution. There were also issues about going back to culture, which again Dr. Ojuan has talked about. A very important statement that was made because Milka in Tumor. Then another issue was making devolution work and making public services delivered well. They had a very interesting term, skin in the game, that you shouldn't go to a private hospital abroad if you are the Minister for Health. And if you're the Minister for Education or Cabinet Secretary, you should actually have your skin in the game. You should be able to know what is being delivered there. Having seen the report then, I have had snippets of what it has become. And I think quite a lot of the emphasis on expanding the executive has taken a lot of space. And I think in the arguments, we have lost the whole question of why we wanted gender equality. Actually, gender equality is an issue that is likely to be lost as we move towards an expanded executive, which will have five, and I will have no apology saying this, already identified men. And when you say the two-thirds gender rule, it doesn't seem to operate at that level. So I hope I have helped you understand some.
Thank you, Professor. By asking that question, I wanted you to shed light to Kenyans why certain things are happening the way they do, and also to speak to the issue of why maybe BBI is timely, because the argument out there is that BBI is going to replicate what is already in existence. And this speaks to what Professor Kibwana was actually saying about the perception that the central government still holds a lot of the resources that ought to have been devolved to the devolved units. Professor Kibwana, in the BBI debate, and if you look at the resources that have been devolved so far, will you say that the county government have effectively used the resources they have been given to justify an increment in the resources that the 45% that you require going forward?
I think, let me first of all say that in terms of BBI as it unfolds, one of the things that one could question is the extent to which it was actually socialized among the Kenyan citizenry. Because now we say, what else do we need to add? Because this point of the winner takes it all. People also want to win even when they have not won an election. And that's a problem because if we accept if there's electoral justice, and like in other democracies, we accept that when you lose, you lose. When you win, you win. And you accept that there can be an opposition. And that opposition is respected, it's part of government, as in other democracies. So we will, of course, look at the BBI as a council of governors. We debate things together. But I wish that given my reflection on it, I wish that it was more socialized. And I hope in this case it will be socialized, and then there will be a free and fair referendum so that people can say yes or they can say no.
Thank you, Professor. And you ended on a right note when you mentioned that the Constitution, the current one, is ahead of its people and ahead of the leaders. This brings the question of public participation, which is a key principle that came with the 2010 Constitution, and the role of the academia and the role of the civil society. And this question is to Mccollum. Mccollum, what can we do to ensure that we have a public that is more informed, to be able to question the Constitution, to be able to hold the leaders to account, and to be able to demand for the full implementation of the Constitution, as Professor is suggesting?
Thank you so much, Sam. One is to actually not underestimate the people. Professor is right that we have a constitution that is fairly ahead, so we were much more forward-looking than people actually think. But I also, as I gave the example of the people from my village, they have already internalized. If they can have a water project and they're saying, we've got to make sure that the leadership is constitution compliant, that means that there's something there. But what can we do? It means we've got to have these kinds of conversations like we're having today. And so that's why we must laud the Law Society of Kenya. Professor Kivuta talked about strengthening civil society. But I would also say this. Chinua Achebe says, things fall apart. Quotes the neck of the bird that says that since men had learned to shoot without missing, it had learned to fly without perching. Times have changed. And so civil society must also re-engineer itself to be able to deliver this conversation about civic education or civic awareness very, very differently. We've got, in fact, to rethink what constitutes civil society so that professional bodies like ours that may not see themselves as civil society need to see themselves exactly for what that is. We've got to see that we take advantage of different moments to also have conversations that are technical but also are practical. And, using this, I want to also talk about, in some sense, push a little bit back on the idea of litigating. And I know both Professor Ojenda and Professor Kibwana talked about we must litigate. I want to push a little bit back by saying maybe we are also putting too much premium on litigation because there are many other alternatives for accessing dispute resolution, or at least realizing some of the aspirations of the Constitution. By some accounts, I remember reading a report by some organization based in The Hague that talked about formal institutions like judiciaries only catering for 20% of the justice needs of people, and yet we invest so heavily in that. I know arbitration, like Jackie, do a massive amount of work. We need to also invest in alternative platforms for these kinds of conversations. Last but not least, we've got to just revisit our humanity and our levels of tolerance. I think as a society, there is a sense in which we have heightened our intolerance to the other. Whether the other is a young person, and I think I am older, whether the other is a woman and I am a man, whether the other is from a different community than myself, that other has something that they can contribute to you. But I see sometimes when people want to read articles, even in the newspaper, they start by looking at who is the author. And then they conclude about what that article is about before reading. That's a level of intolerance. And so if we are talking about civic education and engagement, we've got to engage in our tolerance levels. Lastly, is to go back to the issue that Professor raised, Professor Mbota, about leadership and integrity. And to actually say what leaders do and what leaders say matters. And so this is really a call to all leaders. And I'm talking to leaders in this room because all of us are leaders. So what we do and what we say matter. So it is us to also show and not just speak about them. During this time of Corona, many of us have done a number of things, I'm sure you have done. One day I took my family for a hike at the Ololua forest. A week before we had been at Karura. I was much more knowledgeable of Karura than Ololua. So, but I knew a little bit. So I said, okay, we are going to start with the waterfall and then we go to the cave. And after we had done that, we now went and my 10-year-old son asked, so Daddy, where are we going next? And I said, I don't know. And he says in a small voice, so you do not know where you are taking us? Then we are lost. At the point that 10-year-old was saying, when leaders do not know, when leaders have no vision, the society is lost. So the responsibility on you and I. Thank you.
Thank you, Makolo. Leaders have no vision. We are putting a lot of premium on litigation. I'll come to Professor Jenda and Evans Monari on that. But before I go to them, Dr. Duncan Ojuan, I recently heard you on one of the radios in Kenya where you were questioning the effect of COVID when you stated that you only realized that you're the only one who was social distancing and keeping at home. Dr. Article 43, and we've mentioned here time and again that we have a very progressive constitution, but then 43 talks about the right to clean water, the right to health, the right to education. How has COVID affected this particular right as envisaged under Article 43 of the Constitution?
Thank you, Alosa Sam. Your question looks innocent, though I know better that there is no innocent questions with you. I think you want me to speak for you and doubt Corona on your behalf. I will not do that. But I appreciate the question. Let me comment briefly about the BBI, then this one. I will combine them. You know, I was reading up to this morning the debate Professor Kivutha Kibwana had with Ali Mazrui in the 90s. And Kivutha Kibwana disagreed with Ali Mazrui on his version of what he was looking at federalism, looking at the internal, what he was calling internal colonization of coast, on their resources not owned by them. And by that time, Professor Kivutha Kibwana strongly disagreed with Ali Mazrui. Professor Nyong'o strongly disagreed with Ali Mazrui. And in the articulation, I think they were kind of dismissing the extreme side of devolution, but not so much. They didn't stand as the people who are saying devolution is a good thing, according to what I was reading. And I think Professor is here, he will elaborate. So when we talk of thinking ahead of time, look at the debate Mazrui had in the 80s and 90s about articulating what needs to be done. What he was calling the ethnic superstition, that no, we have to accept that we are ethnicized, we have to find a system where everybody can actually have their resources and run them. We have to accept that this centralization and everything going to Nairobi and having a melting pot cannot work in this country. And those were very radical discussions then. But you can see that they have become an easy thing now, and through that discussion, it gave birth to devolution. Devolution was a very radical idea, and I think at some point when Professor will talk, I would like to hear how he disagreed with Masrui, who in my account was very right, and now that he's dead, I could speak for him. But it is interesting, because at that time he was the Dean, University of School of Nairobi, and I'm imagining with that authority, if he disagreed with Masrui, Masrui looked like he had no grounding on fighting for devolution. That is the same thing with even the idea of BBI. You know, it has become, are you pro or anti? And when things are framed in that binary cause, then it becomes very hard to say I agree but or I disagree but. And that has come because the politics, as Professor Kameri have said, have taken part in it. I was having discussion with Professor Migai, who I think really helped my understanding, because he was saying what BBI is articulating is the pre-Naivasha consensus. That up to Naivasha, we had the prime minister position. We had these things that were removed during the PNU and ODM consensus. Remember former prime minister surprising the PNU wing by simply pulling out from the prime minister demand, for example. And because it was going to be the game changer, and there was a plan that we are going to walk out if they demand for prime minister. And instead they said, let us claw back the executive power of the president, rather than simply demanding for prime minister, because it's not attainable. So I wish that those who are talking of BBI could frame it better in terms of, and I've heard even former prime minister talking of, this is the pre-Naivasha, because that constitution was all along, even in the hands of experts, until the Naivasha consensus, which removed those clauses. And even if you talk of all winners take all, you can see that I don't know whether the promise of BBI is doing that, because it is the reality that in this country, at every point, we will have two strong formations. One might be 53%, another on 47%. At any point, even from the coming election, you could see we will have two strong formations, because there will be coalitions. That is what the Constitution has meant, that you cannot win alone, you'll need to make a coalition, you'll need to have 50+1, and so every community will form coalitions. Now, to say that if one team win, they get president, prime minister, deputy prime minister, how is that engineering and resolving our problem of winner takes all? Because that is now winner takes double. And I'm imagining that winner takes all, because we know that there is nothing much in the promise of political parties. It will be, look at it this way, the reason that BBI was being articulated, you cannot tell 48% of Kenyans to go home, wait for you as you rule, as you distribute resources in your favor, as you have appointment, because opposition seat does not appoint people. Yet this side articulate 48% of the issues of Kenya. Opposition seat does not have budget to do development. And everybody, you can see even the articulation of those who are blaming the other side. It is, I voted for this government, therefore I deserve better. What will be the argument of the other person? We didn't vote for you and we consider it can't work. Even in this generation, everybody is claiming, I voted for you, therefore you need to give me a larger share. So I think that within that, let BBI be bold and engineer this thing and say, you know what, if you are losing with 48%, you are carrying the dream of 48% of Kenya. Be the prime minister. And you who have won, good for you, whether it's through the system or whatever, get the 52%, be the president and have deputy president. Then now we can really talk of inclusivity. But if it is about adding positions, and then if you form a coalition that you win, you carry all the 6 seats, there will not be much difference. Finally, on the issue of On the issue of COVID, you know, COVID have shown the real marginalization and inequality. It has exposed it. The issue of COVID, even within COVID, you can see has been articulated within the Constitution. We have seen that as the issue of inequality is exacerbated with the COVID, the poor and those who are not able to afford things, according to the Article 41, right to health, right to housing, right to food, quality food, right to water. I think, Losa, this debate stuck somewhere, because if you look at the litigation starting from the Mitubel case, starting from Satra Sayoma case, and all this litigation in case, the biggest one is Mitubel. And in Mitubel, where Judge Mumbi really re-engineered and give life to this constitution, saying you are going to articulate how you are going to address, for example, right to shelter, to the Attorney General. Of course, you know she was reversed by the Court of Appeal. She really made life to it. But I'm thinking that all those who litigate in terms of these social rights have not found the good grounding. You know, Court of Appeal was saying, we don't want you to be bringing international clauses and whatever. We want you to self-engineer an endogenous solution. I look at this constitution and the promise of social justice, the promise of equality under Article 10, and the promise of you know, managing the affair of the government, promote social justice, inclusivity, equality, human right, non-discrimination, protection of marginalized. All these human rights have not been articulated better. If we borrow what South Africa did, South Africa realized that somebody removed the clause that the value underpinning their constitution is Ubuntu. And up to now, the South Africa scholars are saying, where is our Ubuntu? Because the experts came and they didn't understand what was Ubuntu, and they removed it. Now, if you go to South Africa constitutional courts, they have actually read the Bill of Rights in terms of Ubuntu, social justice, dignity, humanity, community. And here we have kind of assumed, because the Constitution is talking of liberal and democratic society, and we have run with that chapter to mean that that liberal means this right must be articulated within very liberal sense. But I think that if we ground these rights, and there is a lot of provision. For example, Dr. Dote was asking me the provision of customary law. Remember, it's in the Constitution. And what does customary law articulate? Ubuntu. If these underlying values could be given, and that is why what Court of Appeal Judge Odek was telling Mumbi, you are very sharp, Judge. We want you to renovate within us, not just going and saying this is the declaration, this is the economic, social, and cultural framework on forced eviction. We want you to look from within, because that's what the Constitution was giving us. So I think that, you know, why should I care if somebody don't have a mask? Why should I care that somebody has been beaten or giving birth at the gate of Pumwani Hospital? Why should I care that somebody is being evicted and you have seen all this massive eviction? Yes, there is a right, but what is the underlying grounding of this right? The Constitution talk of social justice, the Constitution talk of inclusivity, of giving everybody what he deserves, of taking care of vulnerable. That is the Ubuntu principle. There you go, and a liberal like you will never articulate that.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for your contribution to that and the need to domesticate our approach within our local setup. And I just want to proceed from where Makolo stopped with regard to over-litigation. And Professor Gender, you had actually spoken to the issue of litigating and litigating all the time until we get things right. My question then is, Prof, don't you think we need to adopt a strategic way of litigating so that we do not have a situation where we set up ourselves, or we set up our judiciary to failure where they pronounce themselves, but we enable them to implement the directives that the judiciary has actually issued. Mccollum talks about alternative methods of resolving certain issues as opposed to litigating them. Because the problem of litigating them, and you have the orders and they're not implemented, I want to believe that it has the effect of weakening the judiciary. Professor Jenda, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Losa. Let me start from where Daktari left on the question of Article 4. You're asking about Article 43,
Yes.
social, economic, and social rights. I want to link that to your question. I will not say anything on BBI because I support BBI without a reason. I think it is common ground that both sides of the political divide, both Tangatanga and Keleweke, would benefit greatly from an expanded executive. And I believe that BBI brings back autonomy to the Constitution. It invokes the sociological underpinnings of the Constitution. So leaving that aside, let us go to the question of litigation. Litigation is definitive, is final, and has the advantage of creating precedent. Of course, it is conflictual, and perhaps it is derived from the winner
Thank you, Prof. I didn't expect you to say otherwise. Growing up, I know you as a litigator, and I saw you in court throughout, so I know why you are making a case for litigation. Evans Monari, from what Professor Gender has said, you will notice that when it comes to the enforcement of the chapter on the Bill of Rights, as Professor Mbote had actually mentioned, we concentrate more on filing cases against the state. Is it the case that private individuals do not violate fundamental rights of others? All I'm asking is it possible for us, or is it the time now to focus on the horizontal application insofar as enforcement of fundamental rights, as opposed to always suing the state?
Thanks. Now, when the state violates an individual's rights, it is an individual within the state who carries out that action. It's not a monolithic state that is violating an individual's rights. There is a person within the state or persons who make that decision, and they violate the citizen's rights. That is asking a question. Do you go before the courts and accuse these individuals? I think I agree with Professor. We should attempt to do that. We should not limit ourselves in terms of litigation. We should go the full hog at all times. It is time that individuals within government or the private sector who are responsible for people's rights to start feeling the pinch personally, to start losing their own property because of disregard of fundamental rights of the citizens. To always look at the state and sue the state and expect that it's only the state that can compensate for the loss of rights is actually to exacerbate that problem, because then people will continue violating fundamental rights because the state will cover them in the compensation. So what I'm trying to say is that we must find a way in which we can attack the actual individuals that are involved in the violation of individual rights. You see, like now, when we look at our state, the way it is, we have a political and a constitutional crisis. Our constitutional crisis has preceded the political one for a long time. Now, if all these two issues are ignored and remain unresolved as we go into the elections in about 2 years' time, these situations have a serious potential to cause us a serious political crisis of very many of monumental standards. And I'm saying this deliberately because His Excellency Honorable Kibuga Kiwana is on the webinar. So I'm speaking to the leadership of our country, and that we should start articulating some of these issues now, even as we think about what we have done with our constitution in the last 10 years. If we have not implemented some of the provisions that we set for ourselves, let us find out why. Are they implementable? Do they make any sense? Professor Mbote spoke of the BBI. I think the BBI is a crisis also that is waiting to explode. Because if we went into a referendum today, it would be like a referendum of 2005, which is like a midterm test for the sitting government. And if that referendum fails to get the results that are required, then we will get ourselves into a crisis. We can speak to ourselves in terms of constitutional provisions and what we have done in devolution, but we must face the real crisis that is facing our country and face it now while we still have strength, while we're still talking to each other. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Evans. Thank you, Evans, for that contribution. Before we wind up, Catherine Muma, there was a discussion during the process of the enactment of the 2010 Constitution with regard to whether we needed to have the Kenya Human Rights Commission and the National and Gender and Equality Commission as one, or we do have separate, we ended up with the separate bodies. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and going forward, what is your take? Do we remain with the two, or is it time to merge them into one?
And Catherine, as you answer, please also enjoin the Commission on Administrative Justice in that question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Article 59 actually provides for the possibility of one or more commissions to implement the mandate of the National Equality Commission. And we had a big debate when we were separating the commissions. There was a big rivalry between the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and the Gender Commission, which was then a department under the Ministry of Gender. And it was agreed that we end up with the three functions, with the CAJ serving the mandates under Article 47, 46, while the other two were to focus on, while the Gender Commission was to focus on gender and minorities, while the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, on which I actually served, I served on the first Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, would focus on the traditional issues in terms of checking governance, and then by governance I mean the straight civil and political aspects of governance, which has been the focus of those commissions. Now, in determining whether to have one or three, a number of things were considered. We looked around what the practices elsewhere in South Africa, in Ghana, in the UK, and elsewhere. And what we found that jurisdictions with one commission tend to focus largely on the governance issues, the civil and political issues, and matters relating to gender and minorities tend to fall through the cracks, or they are addressed marginally. And it is for that reason that we actually decided to have more than one commission. If you look at South Africa has two commissions. The main commission, I mean the commission that addresses broad issues, and it has a gender commission. It has been criticized for having a weak gender commission. In Ghana, on the other hand, Ghana has only one national human rights institution, which has been criticized for not adequately addressing the gender issues. So considering those two issues, we felt that we needed to have more than one commission. I still feel we need to have more than one commission. Currently, in my view, I think both commissions, I'm not speaking about the CAJ because its mandate is separate, it's the Ombuds's office, and I think it should be left as such. But speaking to how Kenya
Thank you, Catherine. From your comments, what came out is the failure to implement the Constitution as a result of impunity, more so by the executive and the legislature. And more importantly, you mentioned that maybe it's time the lawyers need to come out of court and pursue other means to try and ensure the enforcement of the Constitution. That point of lawyers coming out is where I want to invite President Nelson Harvey, who is now present, we can see him, at least to make his brief remark and also speak to the issues of lawyer coming out of court. And more importantly, as Professor Kibwana had actually mentioned, the law societies of the 80 and 90 was vibrant, but something happened to the LSK post-2010. We will want President Harvey to speak on the role of lawyers in the implementation of the Constitution going forward. President Harvey, welcome.
It's actually exactly 12 o'clock, so it is appropriate for me to say good afternoon, learned friends. I'm
Afternoon.
delighted to speak on this big day, a day in which
Thank you, President Harvey. And on a light note, Senior Counsel Monari has mentioned that he has never owned a Bentley. But my remark to that is that, Evans, you should have said amen. You never know when you'll own one.
He has a Bedford, which is as good as the Bentley.
On that note, I will want to hand over the mic back to my senior, Dr. Dote, to take us to the next phase. Thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Samalosa, and thank you, Nelson Harvey, President LSK, for the sentiments that you shared. I think after Nelson has spoken, it is time for us to take a pause and reflect. Under normal circumstances, we would have opened this for Q&A, but I'm also mindful of the fact that we took Governor Kibwana from Barbara's session. Therefore, we saved her 30 minutes, which 30 minutes we'll request that she kindly takes up for purposes of Q&A when we come back in the afternoon. So we'll want to stop here so that we can be able to take a short break, come back for the next session, and I want to hand it over back to the organizers. I was looking for my namesake. It seems to have gone to make some administrative arrangements, and that administrative arrangements may include how we will go back to the city. But let me hand it over to Faith Odhiambo to tell us what happens next. But thank you very much for being a very good audience, and thank you very much. Yes, Catherine. Yes, Catherine.
When you say there will be a Q&A, expected to come back?
No. You know the Q&A continues, so we will have Q&A for the next group. You are completely released, Catherine, for other national duties. We will see you at the next session. So I want to thank Catherine. I want to thank Evans. I want to thank Patricia. I want to thank Tom. I want to thank Maurice. I want to thank Duncan. And I want to thank Professor Kivuda Kibwana for the very lively conversation. And also please join me in thanking my co-moderators, Sam and Losa, for a very good job. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon. Faith, over to you.
So we thank you once again, our moderators, for taking us through a very lively and informative session, and also all our panelists. So for Q&A, what we'll do is that we can get a hold of all our panelists. So if you have any questions particularly directed to them, you can send them via email or via the chat, and we will find a way to share them with the various speakers, and they'll be able to send back responses to you. So we thank you for that. We would like to break for lunch for now, and we'll come back for the second panel, dealing with the gains and challenges on access to justice and rule of law. So thank you very much, and would like to close for this session. Good afternoon.